You're 50 years old. You and your spouse pull in $500,000 a year combined. You've got a house worth $1.5 million. You've got investment accounts, retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, all in north of $6.5 million. And you're sitting there stressed, genuinely losing sleep over whether you can afford to quit your job. Sounds insane, right? Like, must be nice energy, right? Here's the thing, though. This is a real letter from a real woman sent to a real financial advice columnist. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why someone with $6.5 million can still feel paralyzed about walking away from a paycheck. And more importantly, you're going to understand the actual math, the actual psychology, and the actual decision-making framework that applies whether you've got $6 million saved or $600 saved. Because the fear is the same. Only the zeros are different. Hello, I'm Anne. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, or financial advice. Let's get into it. So here's our letter writer. 50 years old, married, lives in California. She and her husband own their home outright. Well, almost. There's still $250,000 left on the mortgage, but the house itself is worth $1.5 million. That's a serious chunk of equity just sitting there. Their monthly mortgage payment is technically $3,000, but, and pay attention to this detail because it matters later, they've been voluntarily paying $5,000 a month. They're overpaying by $2,000 every single month, chipping away at that loan faster than they have to. Combined, she and her husband bring in about $500,000 a year. Her husband alone makes $300,000. She's got a $200,000 a year job that she's thinking about walking away from. Now, here's where it gets interesting. She manages her own investment account. Not a financial advisor, not a robo-advisor, her. And that account is sitting at $3 million. And get this, it's been returning somewhere between 10 and 15% annually. She also runs her own IRA, separately, worth $2 million. Her husband's got a 401k sitting at $1.5 million. Add it all up, roughly $6.5 million in investable assets, plus the house, plus 2 daughters, one finishing up her 3rd year of college, one a junior in high school, and both of their college funds are fully covered already. Paid for. Done. Not even a variable in this equation. Their monthly expenses, not counting the mortgage, run about $10,000. So she writes in and says, and I love this line, I'm a realist. She's not asking for permission to dream big. She's asking, point blank, can I actually do this? Can I leave my $200,000 job and trade full-time? What am I missing? And look, when you first read a letter like this, your gut reaction is probably somewhere between eye-rolling and disbelief. $6.5 million, and you're asking if you can retire? But stick with me here, because this is exactly the trap that catches smart, financially successful people all the time. The more money you have, the more sophisticated your fears become. You stop worrying about running out of milk and start worrying about sequence of returns risk and healthcare cliffs, and whether your spouse's job-based insurance disappears the day they clock out. The stakes go up, so the anxiety goes up right alongside it. Money doesn't erase fear. It just upgrades the fear to a more expensive model. So let's actually answer her question. Is this realistic? Short answer, yes. Resoundingly, obviously, mathematically, yes. But the why behind that yes is where the real lesson is. So let's slow down. Here's the first number that matters. Her annual expenses. $10,000 a month, not counting the mortgage, means $120,000 a year just to live. Add the mortgage payments she's actually making, not the minimum, the real $5,000 a month she's choosing to pay, and you're looking at roughly $180,000 a year after tax to maintain her current lifestyle exactly as it is. No downgrades, no sacrifices. Same house, same routine, same life. Now here's where the math gets almost funny. There's a long-standing rule in retirement planning called the safe withdrawal rate. The idea is simple. If you pull a certain percentage out of your portfolio every year, adjusted for inflation, you can make that money last for decades without running dry, because the market's average growth replenishes what you're taking out. The classic number people throw around is 4%. But when you're talking about a retirement that could stretch 40, even 45 years, because remember, she's 50 and people are living a long time now, the more conservative, more bulletproof number drops to around 3 to 3.25%. So let's do the math on her $6.5 million, using that conservative 3% figure. 3% of $6.5 million is $195,000 a year. That's it. That's the number. She needs $180,000 to live exactly as she lives now, and a conservative, stress-tested withdrawal rate generates $195,000. She's not just covered. She's covered with room to spare, and that's before factoring in any Social Security down the line, before factoring in any continued income from her husband, before factoring in anything else. Let that sink in for a second, because here's the psychological trap a lot of people fall into, and it doesn't matter if you're sitting on $6 million or $60,000. We tend to assume that the good years are the normal years. She's been getting 10 to 15% annual returns managing her own account. That's phenomenal. That's better than the long-term average of the S&P 500. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Assuming those returns continue forever is how people blow up their retirement plans. It would be financial malpractice to build a 40-year plan around your best-case scenario. The smart move, the move any good advisor will push you toward, is to stress-test your plan using a more modest, more historically grounded return, something in the 5 to 7% range, and see if the plan still holds up. If it does, fantastic. You've built something resilient. If it doesn't, you've just saved yourself from a nasty surprise 10 years into retirement. And this is the part most people skip. They run the numbers once, using their best year as the baseline, and they call it a plan. That's not a plan. That's a hope dressed up in a spreadsheet. There's another layer here that's sneaky and dangerous, and it's called sequence of returns risk. Here's the metaphor that makes this click for people. Imagine two hikers leaving on the same trail, same gear, same fitness level. One of them gets hit with a brutal storm in the first mile. The other gets the storm at the very end, right before they reach the cabin. Both hikers experience the exact same total amount of bad weather over the whole trip. But the one who got hit early has to make every single decision after that storm while soaked, cold, and behind schedule. The one who got hit at the end just has to push through to a destination that's already in sight. That's exactly what happens with market downturns and retirement withdrawals. If the market tanks in the first few years after you stop working and you're pulling money out during that downturn, you're selling assets at depressed prices to fund your life. That digs a hole that's brutally hard to climb out of, even if the market eventually recovers and averages out fine over the long run. The math of withdrawing from a shrinking pot is just fundamentally different from withdrawing from a growing one. Same average return over 40 years, completely different lived experience depending on when the storm hits. So what do you actually do about that risk? You build a buffer. The standard advice, and it's standard for a reason, is to keep more than a year's worth of living expenses in something stable and liquid. Cash, short-term bonds, something that doesn't crater when stocks do. That way, if the market drops the year after you retire, you're not forced to sell your investments at the worst possible moment. You just live off the buffer, let the market recover, and resume withdrawals once things stabilize. It's not exciting. It's not going to generate exciting returns sitting in cash. But it's the seatbelt that keeps the whole plan from crashing in year 2. Let's also talk about the emergency fund question, because this gets overlooked constantly, even by people who are otherwise financially sharp. Most working people are told to keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash just in case. But once you actually retire, that advice needs to scale up, not down. Why? Because when you're working, a job loss is the main emergency, and you can usually find another job within months. When you're retired, the emergency isn't losing income. It's the market deciding to misbehave right when you need to pull money out of it. So the advice for someone in her position shifts toward holding more than a full year of expenses in cash or cash equivalents, not the standard 3 to 6 months. It feels excessive when you're staring at a portfolio worth millions. But that buffer is precisely what stops a bad market year from turning into a bad decade. Now let's talk about Social Security, because this is a piece almost everybody gets wrong, and it's not even close. You're allowed to start claiming Social Security as early as 62. Most people think of 67 as the normal retirement age. But here's the part that blows people's minds. If you delay claiming all the way until 70, your monthly benefit goes up by roughly 8% for every year you wait past your full retirement age. That's not a typo. 8% a year, guaranteed, government-backed, no market risk attached. Find me an investment anywhere that offers a guaranteed 8% annual increase with zero risk. You can't. It doesn't exist. Which is exactly why, for someone in her financial position who doesn't urgently need the income at 62 or even 67, waiting until 70 to claim is almost always the mathematically superior move. It's free money that the system is begging you to take, and most people leave it on the table because they want the check sooner rather than later. Here's another piece of the puzzle that sounds boring, but is genuinely a wealth-building tool, something called a tax map, paired with Roth conversions. Basically, once you stop earning a $200,000 salary, your taxable income drops. That creates a window, sometimes a multi-year window, where you're sitting in a much lower tax bracket than you were while working. Smart planners use that low-income window to convert chunks of traditional retirement money into Roth accounts, paying taxes now at a low rate instead of later at a potentially higher rate, and locking in tax-free growth from that point forward. It's like finding a clearance sale on your own future tax bill, but the sale only exists for a limited window, and you have to actually walk into the store to take advantage of it. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room that doesn't show up in any spreadsheet: her husband. She's asking if she can retire. Fine, the math says yes. But what happens to the relationship dynamic when she's sipping coffee at home at 10 a.m. and he's still grinding through a $300,000 a year job? That's not a math question. That's a human question. And it's the kind of question that wrecks marriages if it isn't discussed openly before someone pulls the trigger. Will there be resentment? Will there be pressure on him to also walk away sooner than he's financially or emotionally ready for? These conversations need to happen at the kitchen table, not after the resignation letter's already been submitted. And there's a very real financial domino that follows right behind that emotional question: health insurance. Right now, it's entirely possible that her husband's job is the thing covering both of their health care. The moment he decides to retire too, that coverage disappears, and you're not eligible for Medicare until 65. So if he stops working anywhere in his 50s or early 60s, you're now shopping for private health insurance on the open market or navigating the Affordable Care Act marketplace. And premiums for people in their 50s and 60s are not cheap. That's a 5-figure annual expense that can sneak up on people who only ever budgeted for groceries and the mortgage. Now let's talk about her plan to fill her newly free time with full-time trading. This is the part where I want to pump the brakes a little, because there's a meaningful difference between managing a long-term investment portfolio, which she's clearly been doing well given those 10 to 15% returns, and actively day trading individual stocks for a living. Those are not the same skill, and they are definitely not the same risk profile. If her track record comes from disciplined, long-term portfolio management, leaning into that full-time is a perfectly reasonable plan. But the moment you shift toward frequent buying and selling of individual stocks, trying to time moves day to day, you're playing an entirely different and much more dangerous game, one where even professionals with decades of experience and entire research teams behind them frequently lose money. The market does not care how good your last 5 years were. And here's a number that should make anyone pause before assuming the current bull market just keeps rolling forever. As of recently, just 5 companies, Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, and Amazon, make up almost 1/3 of the S&P 500, and Nvidia became the first company ever to hit a $5 trillion valuation. Think about what that means. A massive chunk of the market isn't actually hundreds of diversified companies anymore. It's a handful of giant tech and AI names. When the index is that concentrated, a stumble in just 1 or 2 of those companies can drag the whole market down with it, even if the broader economy is perfectly fine. That's not a doomsday prediction. It's just a structural reality of where we are right now. And anyone planning a 40-year retirement needs to plan for the possibility of a correction, a recession, or a full-blown crash at some point along the way, because history guarantees that one is coming eventually. We just never know exactly when. And here's the thing people forget in the middle of a good run. The market has done this before. More than once. There was the dot-com crash at the turn of the millennium, when internet companies with no profits and barely any revenue were valued like they'd already conquered the world, right up until they didn't. There was the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, when an entire financial system built on shaky lending assumptions came apart at the seams almost overnight. There was a global pandemic that shut down economies in a matter of weeks. Every single time, in the moment, it felt like the rules had changed forever, like this crash was different and the recovery wasn't coming. And every single time, eventually, the market found its footing again. The lesson isn't, don't worry, it always bounces back. The lesson is, build a plan that survives the scary part, because the scary part is not optional. It's a recurring feature of investing, not a bug. Even more recently, you saw a version of this play out on a smaller scale. Tariff-related jitters rattled the market earlier in 2025, and you had no shortage of analysts predicting a full-blown bloodbath for stocks, pointing to trade tensions and geopolitical instability as reasons to brace for the worst. Stocks dipped. Then, stocks recovered, and a lot of those same voices quietly walked back their predictions a few months later. That's not a knock on forecasters specifically. It's a reminder that nobody, no matter how confident they sound on television, can reliably predict short-term market moves, which is exactly why a retirement plan built on hoping you'll dodge the next downturn through good timing is not a plan. It's a gamble wearing a suit. So where does all of this leave our letter writer? She can retire. Full stop. The math isn't close. Her conservative, stress-tested withdrawal rate covers her expenses with room left over. Her kids' education is fully funded and off the table as a variable. Her home equity is enormous, and she's got a financially comfortable spouse still bringing in income. This is, by almost any measure, one of the best positioned should I retire questions you'll ever come across. But can I, and how do I do it safely, are 2 very different questions. And that second one is where the real work lives. Before she hands in that resignation letter, she needs an actual plan. Build that cash buffer so a bad first year in the market doesn't force her to sell at the worst possible time. Map out the Social Security decision now, because waiting until 70 is for most people in her situation simply leaving guaranteed money on the table if they claim early out of impatience. Sit down with her husband and have the uncomfortable conversation about what happens to his career, their insurance, and their dynamic if and when he eventually walks away too. And be brutally honest with herself about whether her trading plan is built on a repeatable strategy or whether it's riding the high of a few unusually good years that might not repeat. Here's the bigger lesson underneath all of this, and it applies whether your number is $6.5 million or $65,000. Retirement isn't really a math problem. The math, honestly, is the easy part. Anyone with a calculator and a spreadsheet can run a withdrawal rate. The hard part is everything math can't capture. The identity shift of not having a job title anymore. The relationship recalibration when one partner stops working and the other doesn't. The discipline to stress test your plan instead of betting everything on your best year repeating. And the willingness to build boring safety nets like cash buffers instead of chasing exciting returns right up until the day you need that money. She called herself a realist. And honestly, that's the right instinct. Not blind optimism, not panic, just a clear-eyed look at the numbers and the risks. That's exactly the mindset everyone needs before making a decision this big, whether you're sitting on millions or you're just starting to build your very first retirement account. So here's my question for you. Forget her number for a second. What's your number? What's the figure that would actually let you walk away from your job and feel safe doing it? Most people have never actually run that calculation. They just carry around a vague, anxious feeling that they need more without ever defining what enough actually looks like on paper. Go run your own numbers. Figure out your real monthly expenses, figure out a conservative withdrawal rate, and see how far you actually are from your version of this letter. You might be a lot closer than you think, or you might find out you've got real work to do. Either way, that's infinitely better than not knowing at all. If this kind of breakdown helped you see the numbers differently, stick around because we're going to keep digging into real letters, real numbers, and real decisions just like this one.